all for joining us. I want to introduce you to a few of the team that's on with us today. Bethany is our executive admin at Focus 412. She helps me run the day and brings such value to our team. She served in the church staff for 15 years, and the last of those, she carried the weight as the executive pastor. She's going to be helping us moderate today. Thank you, Bethany. We're so glad that you're here and helping make this actually become a real thing. So you're the best. And many of you know Phil already, but if not, he founded Focus 412 in 2014, where he's led our team and he's coached pastors and leaders of all sizes across the country. But before that, he came out of the cable industry, where he served as the chief operating officer for Time Warner, for AT&T, and then he transitioned into the ministry as part of the lead team at Elevation Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, to help serve alongside Pastor Stephen Furtick. That's where I got the privilege of meeting Phil. And I've had the privilege of being with him since the near beginning of Focus 412. I help coach and run our day-to-day, but what I love the most is the ability to help leaders in churches. So many of you that are on here today, it's just been a privilege to walk alongside of you, to support you, to help just lift your arms as you've gotten to see your church grow through so many different seasons. Yeah, it's been a privilege. So we're happy what we get to do today. I'm going to give a quick background that got us to this webinar, and then we'll dive right into the content. We have seen a great need in the area of management training. We've worked with so many churches that have just kind of seen this promotion over time, where somebody who's been here long enough accumulates more responsibility. And as they accumulate more responsibility, well, more staff begin to develop underneath them, and they lift their heads up one day and realize, I'm leading a bunch of team members, but I've never been trained for this. And sometimes that the title management or the role of a manager sometimes gets a bad rep in the church world. We want leaders. We need leaders to be developed. But as Phil and I were talking and leading into this, is that management is really the technical or systematic elements of leadership. And so that's what we hope to unpack. And throughout this process, we've realized it'd be really helpful to curate a lot of these key or crucial elements of management, put them together and say, how can we help the church in the area of management training, so that leaders aren't just developed as leaders over ministries, but really developed to lead other leaders in these technical and systematic ways. So Phil, we're going to give you a bite-sized piece of one of these topics, and Phil, kick us off.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. And as many of you know, that of those of you that we've had the ability to serve in the past know that Philip was being modest in his own introduction. He's built out much of what you've interacted with, not only content, but strategies and process and a lot of other good things, and leads things day to day. So he's a key element. And as committed as I am and the team are to serving you all. So glad we have a lot of familiar faces on today and some new, and excited about this. Honored as usual to just have the conversation and for us to talk about this stuff. So let me build out the context just a little bit here, because this is a big thing, but we also want you to be able to take this with you right away, be able to apply it. You're probably already applying some of this stuff. So, leading and developing people is challenging. We all know that, especially in our current environment. Seems like it gets harder and harder, but our job is really to navigate through and whatever comes our way, to create a healthy and productive environment for people to use their gifts and experience to do great things in the kingdom. So, that requires relationship, and relationships require conversations. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And because we're zooming in, I want to make it clear, because we're zooming into a very, specific portion. This is a huge topic. It's a huge thing. And so we're going to try to put as much context as we can in this, but understand that we're going to focus kind of in today and at the level of oftentimes these conversations come in times of conflict. So we're going to talk kind of at that slice today, but it's still a paradigm you can apply across your leadership. So because they come in conflict, it could be a conflict from another team member. It could be a conflict from an organizational value, meaning the behavior or the conversation is outside of our organizational values, and it could be a conflict with an organizational standard. So could be relational, could be with values, could be with standards. And if my goal as a leader is to support and develop my people, then how do I know what conversation to have and when those conflicts happen? So think of this as as a spectrum of kind of three general types of conversations. And I think that's a key to this whole conversation is they all kind of interact together, but there are three somewhat distinct types of conversations. And we'll talk a little bit more about how they all interact and involve each other. But we need to understand those and have those kind of in our toolbox to work from. And I think it'll help us with the mindset of which one of those conversations am I in. So based on circumstances, you have to determine what type of conversation to have. So there's really the three that I mentioned. I want to go through those, just what they are, the names of those, and then we'll dive into each one of those separately. So the first is a care conversation. The second is a coaching conversation. And the third, not to be surprised, starts with a C, is a corrective conversation. So it's care.
I feel like that was a slight to me, Phil, that it had to start with
Not
a
a
C. Yeah.
It's actually a compliment.
Oh,
Part
okay.
of Philip's DNA is he makes things stickier, and sometimes even is in the business of translating some things that I say into more clear and concise and sticky things. So I love that about you, and it's super helpful. So it's care, coaching, and corrective. Those are kind of the labels that we put on the things. So Philip and I are going to try to break down each one of those, so you can have what I'll call a practical paradigm that you can start using today. I'm going to headline those and kind of talk about the context or the general principle, and then Philip will kind of put handles on it and get into some of the detail and some of the important kind of systemization of that. So if we're ready, let me
I'll just real quick before we jump into the first one in particular. What I love about this, as we've talked about it, these are really the buckets and the types of conversations that we have to have. And what we've said, and to set this up, is these are the ones that managers need to master, because really any type of conversation we have is one of these three things. And this image, I think, is designed. We'll talk about why it's designed specifically like that. But when you think about it, think of it like a choose your own ending storybook. I love the way that as we're going to unpack it, you're going to see some elements of that, as kind of having these three tools in those toolbox and knowing in which situation to pull out what type of conversation. And then again, yeah, we'll give you some of those practical next steps throughout the process. So yeah, I like it because it's a spectrum. It's intentionally designed to be a spectrum, because at any point in time, and regardless of the length of a relationship, you might have to shift between one or the other, or if we're not careful, we might assume one versus it actually needing to be a different kind. So yeah, let's get into it.
Let's go. That's great. So the first one's a care conversation. I think an important, what we would call identifier, would be if you notice some uncharacteristic behavior. If there's uncharacteristic behavior that you notice in someone, it means that there's some kind of dissonance between where they're at and where they should be. So it's always great to start with care. As leaders, we want to assume the best, meaning you see something that, wow, that was off, that wasn't great, it might be a conflict. I always think, if I assume the best, then there must be some external thing that's causing this behavior or that comment or this consistent thing that I'm starting to see, this pattern. So it's a great place to start. It may lead to other things, but let's start with care and assuming the best. It could also not only be uncharacteristic behavior that you observe something that happens, it could also, obviously, in a care conversation, could be a result of you knowing about a stress or a situation. It could be a family medical issue. It could be a tragedy. It could be anything like that. And those are ones that obviously you all know, to pastor people well, that you want to proactively approach it. So those are kind of the two paradigms, but really shaped around uncharacteristic behavior, something you wouldn't expect.
Right. Yeah, it's just like a flare up. It's like something that's like, that doesn't seem like them. And I think the best way to really help shape that conversation is, okay, so where then do I have that conversation, and how do I structure that conversation? Do I tack it right then and there? Do I wait for my one-on-one? And I think there's some discernment in that, depending on the type of situation and also the type of who, sometimes it's like a spillover when it comes to some of these uncharacteristic situations, and you're saying, okay, do I need to maybe bring this back with the whole group where the spillover happened, or do I need to pull them aside a little bit afterwards? But we'd recommend to host that regular one-on-one. You know us, we teach regularly and often. One-on-one becomes the environment where a lot of this development really gets nurtured. It happens. There's a lot of conversations in these one-on-ones that are both the tasks that are at hand, but also the relationship that's helping drive leadership. And so we say, hey, have that regular one-on-one, and in that regular one-on-one, explore the state of mind. What's going on? That didn't seem like you. That felt a little different. Share what you saw. Share how that maybe made you feel or made other people feel, and then explore those connections. Again, it's not coming with an accusation, but it's looking for understanding. Under those care situations, what you might actually identify is, hey, there's a lot going on at home. Hey, I'm stressed and the strain of things that maybe I'm putting on myself, or things that maybe you, as my manager, put on me. And so it's just the ability to understand where they're at. And what that helps open is, what's the real issue that's underlying the behavior that seemed to be so uncharacteristic. And so when we do that, then we can identify true ways to help alleviate the circumstantial strain. Because it was a circumstantial blow up or spillover, we recognize, oh, this might actually be a circumstantial fix. This isn't something that we need to put on a development plan and work over the next 6 months, but it's something that's saying, how can I tangibly or spiritually help support you in this process? And so this is something I'd also challenge you as a manager, is to have access to some things that might be outside of what your normal benefits are. Is saying, do we have somebody that we could refer you to as a counselor and help offset the cost of that? Do we have some money in the budget to bless our own staff members with a meal, or to support the family if they're going through some medical strain? And so finding ways to say, how can I physically, spiritually, emotionally support you through that process? Sometimes that's probably the greatest help, is just knowing I've got somebody I can talk to through this that cares not just what I can do as a team member, but who I am and how I'm developing as a leader in the organization, and ultimately as a follower of Jesus. So
that's
take
great.
us to the next one, Phil.
That's great. And I think oftentimes that care conversation can segue into a coaching conversation, which is the second one. The identifier for a coaching conversation is really, you're recognizing, if you're coming in immediately with that, it would be recognizing a competency gap, meaning there's willingness, there's awareness, but there seems to be some type of gap between a team member's ability, their understanding, their ability to execute well on a concept or a process or with people. So whatever that is that you've identified, the conversation really is in the epicenter of development, meaning this is where development happens. It's those regular and frequent coaching conversations that can be catalyzed by something that you've seen and observed. It can be something that somebody's coming to you with, but it's somebody that has an attitude of responsibility, effort, and diligent, but they're falling short of the standard. And so your job is to help understand what the issue is and help them meet the standard, but it's about investing in them. And I think in a healthy environment, most of the conversations you have should be in the coaching sphere. That means that, you're always going to have care, and unfortunately there's always going to be correction, but this is kind of the heart of encouragement and challenge to gaps in competency.
Yeah, I love that. I'm posting this in the chat. What you just said is a competency gap is an attitude of responsibility, effort, and diligence, but falling short of the standard. So it's the spirit is willing, the flesh is lacking, maybe, like there's that desire to do it. But I think sometimes when we recognize that, we quickly chalk it up to they must just not be a good fit. We must have done a bad job identifying whether or not they're going to be a contributor we missed it in the recruiting phase or whatever it may be. But I think part of it is also saying, okay, so what expectations did I communicate to them? How did I prepare them to meet those expectations? And that's what I love is in this spectrum, this coaching is so much bigger than all the other types of conversations, because this is the one that's saying, all right, let's live here for a really long time. And, I think that's the benefit that I've received of our relationship, Phil, is that having served with you since 2015, that there's been a lot of varying conversations, and some have been surface level, like, hey, we gotta work on that. Some of you guys on the call may have gotten a few just quick hits is what I call them. Like, hey, don't do that. Hey, here's why we don't do that. Hey, we gotta dress this up a little, right? Like those kinds of things you get. Those are in the coaching conversation. But then there's other ones that are saying, hey, where do you want to be? It's proactive coaching even. Where do you want to be in the next year? Where do you want to be in the next few years? And saying, what steps can we take to help get you there? So I'll give you a couple quick practical things. If you see something off, and there's maybe that competency gap, I think there's really two types of conversations you can have here. One is a quick conversation. Now, the first sign of something, have a quick conversation, gain some of that context, and address the behavior. So let's just say somebody starts showing up a little bit late to a meeting. Then we're saying, hey, I'm just quick pull aside, like, hey, I saw you rolling in, just checking that everything's all right. Let me know what's going on. All right, let's address the behavior. Hey, next time, and I think this is the piece that we often miss, is ascribing a next step. We think having the conversation is addressing the issue, when oftentimes we're just a few degrees short or one extra step short of having the full conversation. Is saying, what I'd really love to make sure that this doesn't become a habit, that you're 5 minutes early to the next few meetings that we have. And again, based on the response in that conversation, you might recognize, okay, flat tire, or okay, and then it shifts to a care conversation. It shifts, but there might be something that you're saying, hey, this beginning to become a pattern. Let's address that the first time, and then give them that assignment, given an alignment to the breakdown. So again, something they can do to help fix or to remedy maybe the first sign of a drop. Anything you'd add there, Phil, or allude to?
I just think to emphasize that both the care and coaching conversations, the thing that they have in common is you're not walking in and directing a conversation. It's it's much more of archaeology, of understanding, coming in and asking questions, understanding, and then, you know, the standard comes in after you address what happened, because you want to first understand what their understanding is of what happened. If you start off with, this was wrong, you need to start
Yeah.
doing this. You know, if you look at football season just started, I'm a fan, but I'm not very knowledgeable, but I do think a lot and observe a lot, you know, and watch some stuff about coaches and good football coaches, whether they're the head coach or they're the offensive or defensive line coach. When you think about the first thing they do when they're in practice, which is where most of, you know, is what we do every day is practice, right? Is they're usually standing there watching people do drills. They're not going, okay, do this, do that, and then they do it. They're watching people do things that they've been working on, and they're seeing certain things. And then usually it's pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, how'd you feel that went? Didn't go good, coach. Well, what do you think was the problem? Well, I feel like I put my foot over here, or I didn't look up. And so then it's, you know, it becomes this inquisitive process, and then you're guiding, leading, encouraging, challenging, versus, okay, this is what I saw, this is what you need to do. Are we good? Because that's a lot of, you know, as a leader, what I see with young leaders. And I think to understand which changes when it comes to the, you know, the shift happens when we come to the third C, really, which is
Right.
correction. You know, correction really is where you know, the identifier is, with a corrective conversation, is
Let,
you know,
let me
use
let
the
me hit
word.
one let
I'm
me hit
sorry.
one thing, Phil, before you start jumping ahead, because I think what we talked about is that
Go for it.
first sign of something off. Just to fill it in a little bit, is the second sign, is that,
Yeah.
again, now you're starting to see a habit, or you're starting to see a pattern. I think that's to your point when you talk about being an archaeologist, is like you got the first layer and saying, okay, what's going on? But if there's that persistent habit, now we're saying, okay, let's get to the root cause of this. And I think that's where the coaching becomes so crucial to what you're talking about, is how do I find the thing behind the thing? How do I ask those questions in such a way that really is what's plaguing you right now? What's really, is there a fear? Is there a performance issue? Is there a, like just a confidence challenge that's going on? And then we can, again, propose adjusted, more prescriptive. The proposed adjustment is a little bit more prescriptive to the change in behavior. So it's saying, all right, what can we give you that, or what can we work out? Because again, that's saying, if using that same coach analogy, that if I'm having some lateral movement challenges, well, there's a different muscle group that I need to start working out to have some of those lateral movements, versus, I'm really great internally with the team that we have, but externally my communication needs a lot of work. So now we can put them on a path or a plan to say, okay, let's practice some of that external communication in some safe ways. Let's observe it, give yourself feedback, and then I'm going to coach you on the gap between what you see and what we need. And I think that's a crucial part of that conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Are we ready for 3?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the third one is corrective conversations. And as those words come out of my mouth, and especially in a, where we're all taking a minute out of our day to kind of talk about this and see if we can get some more handles and tools and understanding, I want to make it clear that, corrective conversations, they're not only critical, but they have to have the care element as well. And I always want people to hear, it's not just going in and making a wrenching on a connection and moving on. The spirit is the same. The identifier is really when you're experiencing some kind of non-compliant or defiant attitude. Defiant's a big word, but it really says there's a lack of willingness to understand, to take accountability, to take ownership. And that's when the conversation shifts. Again, your tone doesn't shift,
Right.
you're still supportive and you believe in the person, but it shifts to more of a little bit more of a you have to lead the conversation, and um, we need to use those care and coaching elements, but it really needs to be more less exploratory and more prescriptive is the best way to say it. Um, and it's really about defining the unmet expectations and the clear next steps to resolve whatever conflict or problem exists that needs to be corrected. And there's some assumption in this that there's probably likely been a care or coaching conversation that led to this. Now, it could be something
Right.
fairly egregious, if you will, that it could be something that just, happened that you're addressing, but that goes straight to corrective because there just is, it's just at that level. But, I'd want you to know you own, again, it's about unmet expectations and clear next steps, but you own the process in this, conversation, and the team member you're talking to owns the result, the resolution of it, right? So you're taking much more control over, we're going into this process, I'm taking you through it. It's no longer going to take a lot of, you know, um, twists and turns, if you will. And so that means that these conversations require the most preparation and the most structure. So, Philip,
I
why don't you
I
talk
just
about some of the
I want to make
particulars?
this. You just, oh man, this is so good because you just made the two things connect really really well in terms of the fact that a lot of times we're wondering, when do you have the corrective conversation? Because I think you're even redefining development. If I coach you, it's not me just correcting you for correction's sake. You did something wrong, you need to do something right. It's saying, let me help you get better from a vantage point that you cannot see. I see this work and the ripple effect that it possibly has. Let me just give you some more perspective to that. Whereas the corrective is saying, we're addressing the, many of you guys have a leadership profile or some element of what makes a great leader in your organization. And I bet many of you, because we've worked with some of you, is saying teachable, 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 teachable. I think this is where this goes over the line of saying they're not teachable. They're not submissive. They're not willing to hear the coaching that you have for them. And that's when the wall kind of goes up. And what you said, Phil, is sometimes we just hope that they quit. This is just not working out. It's like we've abdicated the process, but I love when you said you own the process and the team member you're talking to owns the result. So it's not an ultimatum, but it really is saying, hey, here's the path that we need for restoration, for realignment, for that teachable or coachable spirit. And I think that's what's helpful is that it gets really specific at this. And I think it gets really specific because you need to be really specific if the end result is them leaving the team. You need to have that tracked conversation, the clear next steps in order for them to kind of restore that trust maybe that was violated, or the trust that just isn't there because of the attitude that they have. So schedule a meeting. You see that habit, it's persisting, but now you've got an attitude of defiance. Schedule that meeting, discuss the defiance, detail those mandatory next steps. So we've got that coming up here. Bethany, if you throw that next slide for me. And throughout this process, what we're going to do is we're going to submit a written warning and place them on that performance improvement plan. You don't have to call it a performance improvement plan. You can call it a development plan, whatever you want to do. But in this process, don't shrink so far back that they don't actually know what this is. I think that's the time, especially in the church world, we lean with so much grace because we love them and we want something great for them, that really we aren't clear enough that, hey, this is what's really needed, is to say, hey, this is a warning, this is a development plan, or this is a performance improvement plan. And really a good working definition of performance improvement plan, I can send this in the chat though, is a structured and formalized process designed to provide clear feedback, outline areas for improvement, and set specific goals and actions to help the employee enhance their job performance over 30, 60, and or 90 days for continued employment. So I'll share that because I think that's what's really, really helpful is that the check-in points throughout this to see if there's progress, and then tying it to the measurable results. They're objective standards that can be met. So they know they're winning and we know they're winning. We also know, hey, this just isn't working. It doesn't matter how clear I make it. They seem to not be able to meet the expectation that we have. Even we have tech issues at times. I'm gonna have to have a care conversation with Bethany. She's like, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened. It's okay. This is unexpected. There it is.
There we go.
You're great, Bethany. Thank you so much. So I'll share that definition, but ultimately, again, if that pattern of defiant or non-compliant attitude exists, then it's saying we've tried really hard. And Phil, maybe that's, I know some questions are coming in. We'll hit those in just a minute, but how do you know when this corrective conversation has to have an end result in determination? Hopefully you would catch the behavior and it would go back to coaching, but every once in a while, sometimes you have to have a unnecessary ending, right?
Yeah. And I think, that's where I think we need to, again, double down on process. And it's not that we don't recognize people are in it. It's just, I think couple things. I think to go back just a little bit to set this one up is when Philip talked about, letting people know what the process is, we want to make sure that it's not just what today's conversation is, because oftentimes in corrective conversations, it's to say, this is the process we're going to go through for resolution. And you're at the same time speaking a bit to which way it turns when you get to the next step. So I know what to expect. And if it doesn't, if there isn't some journey that starts to get better, what's going to happen? So then I know kind of what my parameters are. So we're not surprised, because I think sometimes as leaders in our minds, we know where it might go, but the person we're talking to needs to understand kind of this is where we're going, not in a threatening way. If this doesn't happen, then this is the next step, but just outlining the next steps, because there should always be a next step. You can't have a corrective conversation and just say, okay, we're good. You always want to circle back. And quite frankly, if it immediately gets corrected, then my circle back later is encouragement of how great that person's doing and reinforcing kind of the success or the behavior. So Philip asked me the specific question again.
No, it's just knowing when the corrective conversation needs to,
kind of the ultimate end.
Yeah, it's like, because again, we want to believe in the person, and we've seen a little bit of progress, but maybe it wasn't exactly what we defined in our performance improvement plan, and it's kind of that back and forth. How do you decide, hey, this might have to end?
And I think all of the organizations that we work for usually have some kind of an overarching standard for this. So I would want you to think about that. If you're running an organization, you set that standard, and you should have one. If you're part of an organization, you should know what that is and encourage your leadership team, if they don't have one, to have one. Meaning, is our general mode of these things that we work through that, and if there's progress, then we work through it, and then it's resolved. If it's not resolved, typically most organizations and most leaders have an initial conversation, and then there's a period of time, whether it be 30 days, that they're looking for those corrections, and then another period of time and some more coaching and conversation and correction. And then it's usually at the third conversation, it's usually when we're now in a disciplinary process where in the next 30 days, if behavior doesn't change, unfortunately, we're facing some really difficult things, and this is what they are, some consequences. I hate that word, but there is consequences. So
Yeah.
I think really it's a multi-step process. It probably should be at least 3 steps. And again, I would want you to consult with, if you know, have an HR person, or if you have somebody representing the team or your leader, that you would, you know, that they would be looped in up front if those things start to, if it's a bigger deal and it looks like it's going to turn into discipline. I always think development is our approach, and sometimes we have to segue into discipline. And because hopefully if you're making a correction, it goes back into coaching versus continuing into discipline.
Yeah, that's great. We got a couple of really great questions, Phil, that I thought would be worth us unpacking a bit.
Yeah.
This one comes from our dear friend Marilyn from Zeal. Oh, this is a great question. How much is too much coaching / correcting? So when you have a young leader on your team and you feel like you have to constantly coach and correct, where do you focus first? And when do you feel like you back off in certain areas if you're having to correct another area? So again, you got a young leader and they got a lot to work on. Sometimes it feels like a correction. Sometimes it feels like a coach. Like where do you decide to put your energy and effort? And then how do you decide, like, man, I've spent 2 years and I'm seeing minimal growth versus what I was hoping for, expecting?
Yeah, Marilyn, you're awesome, and you ask great questions. And that's as I say a lot, that's a big topic, but we'll take a kind of a simplistic view of it for this application. I mean, I think in terms of trend line, and you know, if you have some leaders that are gonna, you know, some team members that are trying very hard. They are super high potential. They may be fairly low capacity, so you're having to invest a lot, and you're really investing in them no matter where they're at on the scale. And it feels sometimes like if I say anything, it's going to be, you know, it's everything I say has to be coaching, because I just there's a lot of it to have. I get that. And I would say we probably always underestimate the amount of investment we need to make to integrate leader. With that said, if I'm looking over time, to Philip's point, if I'm looking over time and I'm putting a lot into it, but the gap between their potential and their capacity is not steadily growing and closing, you know, that gap is closing, then I have some decisions to make. It doesn't mean that they can't be on the team. It might mean that they were put into a position or a level or have an expectation that there's no way for them to reach. So you need to put them at a level, meaning I might get into the NFL and it's like, I get into training camp and it's like, our recruiting team, you know, misplaced you. You need to go down into the, whatever it's called, the World Football League, and spend another couple years there. And I want to stress that to say, like, you know, thank God I probably stepped up some things that my leaders said, like, you're trying really hard. You're consistently not getting this. And you're trying to play, you know, major league ball and you're still at AAA. It doesn't mean that I'm a AAA person. That means that's where I need to be now. So we step them down and do that gracefully. It also doesn't mean, this is the other side of that, that I'm not saying that there aren't cases where people maybe aren't on the path for, you know, higher and higher level of leadership. Doesn't mean they can't lead higher, but they're just not on the same trend line that your organization is. So they probably need to be somewhere else where they can grow slower, or, you know, there's more moderate expectations, because our churches run fast, hard. We have a huge mission, and, you know, you've got to have people on the team. So be very careful about, you don't want to move, you know, as we say, move the, you know, the chess pieces around and just have people, well, why don't you just go be over there because you're not performing. But you also don't want to just discard people that have high performance. So I would say look at the trend line, and if it's a lot of work and you're not making much progress, then you have that kind of those two decisions to make to triage it.
Yeah. What I think about it too is that, remember, make the distinct difference between these three types of conversation is there's an uncharacteristic behavior that, okay, I got to address that in a care There's the competency. That's the long term. I'm developing you over time. And then the corrective is your spirit is just not right. Like you just don't want to be here. You don't want to receive this. So those can help shift what type. And so if you narrow it to this competency, then you can say, okay, let me look at the list of competencies. And I think that with a young leader, we were all there once, of saying like, I have a whole bunch. Then it's saying, where's that line of saying, I want to work on the things that I make sure aren't vulnerabilities. Let's work on those first. Let's get you proficient in all of the areas. And then let me see where you're really strong, and let's develop those muscles well. Let me see what, so by maybe even looking at the list of things that you're trying to help develop them through or coach them on, you can maybe say, hey, this is going to stop you from reaching the next level more than anything. The way that you present yourself in front of others, the way that you aren't proofing the product in which you want to put out there. Like that's inhibiting you from developing here well. And so some of that is cultural, some of that is personal, and looking at those, and that I would maybe probably prioritize that based on it. Great question, Marilyn. Isaiah's got a good one. Is corrective conversation, Isaiah, Res Church, you rock, go Broncos. All right. Okay, is corrective conversations different for employees and volunteers? So again, thinking the behavior, the attitude is more making some waves. How do you have that different from an employee and a volunteer?
Man, these are great questions.
I know.
These are the tip of the spear here. That's a big one. And I think I would say, first off, this is a big one that falls into the culture of your organization. I think the culture of your organization will have some general values and standards, I hope, around how we perceive our role with volunteers. Some organizations are going to choose to be much more like virtual team members. And so correction can be a stronger component, and other organizations are going to err on the side of, hopefully have expectations of volunteers, but fall more on the side of hey, they're not team members, so we're going to, hate to say it this way, lower our standards for them, or of corrective conversations. We're not going to lean in as hard. So I think understand your organization, because there needs to be consistency. You don't want to, be holding a volunteer fully accountable and making corrections if that's not the tone or culture of your organization. I do think we owe it to, I'll speak to it this way. I think we the more you can make it the same, but understand the context in which you're working. I think if you feel like you are in an organization that leans that way, that you have permission, if you will, you've agreed that that's part of being a volunteer in your organization. I know, and I can speak to, my time at one of the organizations I was a part of, that I was a volunteer. I appreciated the fact that I had said, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better performer. I want to help grow the kingdom. And I'm willing to know that I don't know everything I need to know. And I want to be teachable. I don't care if it's somebody younger than me, older than me. So, I think I would say, if that permission is there, and if the overall is there, then I think they can be much closer. And I think you just have to be cognizant of other things that are going on with people, and that correction feels a little bit more like it would in a accountable relationship outside of a work environment. But it is a tricky one. Maybe we need to someday do a breakout on that alone.
Yeah, no, that's super great. There's another question that came through is, how do you know when to bring someone else into a care conversation, a third party? How are you determining that this is beyond my scope and maybe ready for somebody else outside the organization, or somebody else even inside the organization, but more skilled in that than mine? That's
great. I think, this one's, our world, this whole conversation helps me always come back to like how proud I am of all of you and how you volunteered to, give your life to this, if you will, submitted to, leadership in the church and ministry is, more complex. And some parts of it are just because we pastor people, we love people. There's a lot of components in the corporate world that don't necessarily, I think those things should exist, but oftentimes the circumstances are very different. So, I really think that it's important to lean into these things in a way that we are cognizant of, if you will. And I would put it in these buckets. If you're having a conversation with someone, the time to bring a third party in, Philip mentioned some of them, would be if it's an emotional issue. Be very careful if it's a same-sex conversation, and it's a very personal matter and it requires pastoring, if you will, then we've got to be real careful to make sure that we're not breaching any lines. So you may bring a colleague in, a male or female, depending on which you are, to that conversation. I think if it's a psychological, or you see signs that there are some things that it's not that you're not even capable of, it's things that would be inappropriate to recommend a counselor. And there's a way to do that, not like, wow, you really need a counselor. There's ways to introduce that. But I would say if it's an emotional issue, if it's a mental issue, psychological issue, if you perceive that, then those aren't the areas that we should be jumping into. That's not an area I'm going to jump into. I'm just going to triage it, and I'm going to, and don't be afraid to, don't shut the conversation down, but don't be afraid to kind of bring it to, temporarily land the conversation and then step back, talk to your supervisor, your manager, or your leadership, or a third party about the situation, and then come back to it. If you feel like sometimes I'm over my ski tips and I just go, listen, let's talk about this again this afternoon, and let's circle back on this. And you pray for them, and you kind of come back and regroup.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, you think about it, using Exodus 18, when he establishes these layers of leadership, that there's the hard cases to judge always got brought up to the next level. And I would evaluate how was I developed and trained to handle difficult situations. And that's sometimes where I think we get into trouble, is if we try to handle a situation you weren't trained for, that puts you at risk, and it puts them at risk as well. So yeah, don't be afraid. I think humble managers are ones that said, I don't know. I'm here with you. I want to help you. Let me find out a way that would be best suited for this situation. So I know sometimes that can be hard, but I would even say collectively, looking at your list of outreach partners, your list of, do you have in-house counselors? Do you have partnerships with counselors externally? And then just saying, hey, if it gets to that point where I feel like I can't handle this, or haven't been trained for this, don't be afraid to say, let me recommend you to a few people. And that's also where you got to get to saying, hey, I'm going to help you grow, but I'm not entitled to a lot of that information, but just, hey, fill me in on progress that you're comfortable with me sharing when it comes to your relationship with your kids, or your relationship with your spouse. So kind of infusing that back into one-on-ones, and giving them the space to communicate to you what they feel comfortable, I think is a great way to do it too.
I think, Philip, the last thing I would add to that would be, if you feel like this is personal, and let's face it, like we get into these conversations, and it could be out of a care conversation, it could be out of coaching, could be out of out of correction. If you're at a point where you feel this is very personal, meaning you're talking to somebody that's, you can, whether it's passive aggressive or direct, that things are hostile, or it's not about a problem, it's about the problem is you or your relationship with them, then that's another place where I don't want you to abdicate your leadership, but I do want you to get somebody else that can come in for both, if you will, HR reasons, and also to help sometimes with that bridge, a third party can help bring clarity to it, because we can be emotionally invested in it as well.
Yeah,
So again, in an appropriate manner, and
that's
it's
good.
another one that takes more time, is to say bring somebody else in to kind of make sure that you've set the stage where it's not you in a room with somebody else and you're squaring off with them. That's just not going to go in the
Right.
right direction.
When I think a great way for you to be able to be coached as a manager is inviting your supervisor to have those regular conversations with your direct reports, and just as check-ins, and to see how you're doing, and just be honest to say, hey, help me get better at leading them. And you'll learn a lot about yourself, and how you respond to maybe some of those coaching conversations too. Does your defense go up? Do you begin to explain situations or circumstances? You're going to learn a lot about that. All right, last question. I want to make sure we honor everyone's time here, as we got, and you just touched on it, Phil. When do you recommend bringing HR into the corrective conversation or the performance improvement space? I'll hit it quickly from my vantage point. A lot of it depends on if you have an HR department. If you don't have an HR department, a person, then you got to have an HR process. So that's worth investing in and saying what's a good process, because then you know how to follow it. But if you have an HR person, when do you bring that in, Phil?
Yeah, I would say you want there to be an immediate awareness if you're in any of these, if you're really in the third stage before you get there. As soon as you leave coaching and you need some form of correction, I always want to give, whether it's an individual or a department, a heads up, because I want to partner with them. I don't want to abdicate my leadership and say, what do I do now? I don't think that's leadership, but I want to say, listen, I've been having some great coaching conversations, but it feels like there's a resistance, or there's an issue, or a compliance issue, and we're going to start these conversations, and this is my plan. It's always helped me as a young leader, and I do it today, to help me think through, am I perceiving this right? Do I have the right plan? And it could be a 5-minute conversation, could be an hour conversation, but I think upfront is the awareness. And then I have a coach and a guide to kind of make sure that I'm keeping my objectivity. So I would say, as soon as I can. HR is like a board. All of our conversations are like, it's the DEFCON 5, pull the switch. And so I want to reverse that paradigm and say, those are support mechanisms that help us with things. So it should be upfront having conversations about something that we journey together with, versus if it doesn't go well, I pull the switch and here comes HR. Does that make sense?
That's great. Well, thank you all so much. I know that if you like this, you want more of this, we've been working really hard to find ways to help you train your managers, or even happy to be invited in to help you and actually training managers together. We're dropping our contact information in the chat so that you can connect with us that way. So thank you so much for making that investment. Another way to get more is coming. It's just within a month. We're doing a management training intensive. So we're doing it there in Houston, October 24th, 25th. We're gonna have some really cool labs. This is what we think. Again, this is what we've been working hard on, to say, hey, you got to start with some character elements. Is management starts with yourself. How do you lead yourself? Gaining a manager mindset. How do you shift from doing the role to leading people in their roles? And those things, really saying, hey, that's a lot about how I lead myself and how I'm making those shifts to become a manager. And then under culture is fostering that healthy culture on your team and leading in alignment with visions. How does the team that I lead and the goals that we set propel the vision forward? So how do we help move that forward? How do we make sure that there's alignment there? And then lastly, the competency, and we just got a taste of it with some of what we talked about today, is developing the potential in people. So what's the infrastructure? What's the heart? What's the spirit behind development? How do we do it? What ways? And then how to communicate, the varying modes of communication, up with supervisors, down with my direct reports, out through mass communication, even meetings and some of that. And then we burrow into a little bit more of this having hard conversations. So a lot of great topics. We say this is not your typical conference, and it really isn't. There is a lot of stuff that we're going through at a really quick speed, but we're going super deep. We've got some practical elements throughout this process that we're pausing. We're lumping people that have like positions at tables together to network with one another, but then also to go deep and say, hey, how do I apply this to my leadership? How do I apply this in my context and my team? And then we've got homework. So I just want to prepare you. If that's what you're signing up for, like, just know what you're signing up for. We would love to have you. But again, just a quick taste of how we can help, want to help churches grow. So if that's helpful for you, please let us know. Happy to answer any questions that you've got. Yeah, I'm going to pray for us, and thank you all for coming. Jesus, thank you so much for our time together. God, for what you're doing in the lives of so many leaders, God, for the perspective, the insight that you give us as just followers of you, that you give us your Holy Spirit and bring wisdom and discernment in that relationship with you. And so we're so extremely grateful for that. I just pray, Lord, that you would multiply the time invested in each of these leaders. God, that the investment of how to care for the people that you've put under their watch, Lord, is fruitful because of the tools, the resources that we've talked about today, and that as they get better, they would share with us so that we could get better, Lord, and that you continue to knit us together as one body, many parts, Lord. So we thank you for the time and for the topics, and just for the ability to relate with each other and to help each other as we spur one another on towards love and good deeds, God. Thank you for that call on our lives and for the opportunity to do this. We love you and pray these things in your son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great day, everyone.